Welcome. It's time to settle down. Dim the lights, relax, and just listen. Let the rain outside, or maybe the quiet inside, set the mood. We have an hour of unsettling tales ahead, stories gathered from the shadows. Make sure you're comfortable. Our first story starts now. Started subtly, the way these things always seem to. I work remotely as a data curator, basically tidying up massive data sets for AI training. My project for the last few months involved sorting and tagging images scraped from defunct forums and old GeoCities pages. Digital archaeology, mostly tedious. My workstation is in the spare bedroom of my apartment, overlooking a perpetually gray courtyard. The first oddity was the cache misses. My software usually prefetches images smoothly, but it started lagging, showing placeholder icons before the actual image loaded. Annoying, but I chalked it up to network congestion or server issues. Then came the wrong images. Instead of a pixelated GIF of a dancing banana, I'd get a fraction of a second flash of something else. It was too fast to register consciously, but it left a residue, a feeling of unease, like seeing movement in your peripheral vision. I decided to run a diagnostic, checking the temporary files folder where the prefetched images were stored. Trawling through the alphanumeric soup of file names, I found them. Mixed in with the expected web detritus were images that didn't belong. They weren't random, they seemed curated. There was one of a single worn leather shoe sitting on a wet pavement, curb glistening under a streetlight. Another showed a child's swing set, chains rusted, one seat missing, silhouetted against a dawn sky. A third was a close-up of peeling paint on a windowsill, the wood underneath dark and stained. They were mundane, yet deeply unsettling. No people, no context, just isolated fragments that felt heavy with unspoken narrative. They all shared a similar aesthetic, slightly desaturated, grainy, like stills from a forgotten film reel. I deleted them, cleared the cache, even ran a malware scan. Nothing. The system came back clean. But the next day they returned, mixed with new ones. A cracked teacup on a checkered floor. A door slightly ajar, revealing only darkness within. A single, bare light bulb hanging in what looked like an empty room, casting long shadows. It felt like someone or something was feeding these images into my cache. The flashes within the software became more frequent. Sometimes I thought I saw my courtyard in them. The brick pattern, the specific way moss grew on the north-facing wall. I'd snap my head up, look out the window, just the usual gray emptiness. Was I imagining it? Sleep deprivation, maybe? Then came the sound files. My curation software didn't handle audio, yet .wav files started appearing in the cache folder alongside the images. Short snippets, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps on gravel, a rhythmic dripping noise, a faint, staticky whisper that I couldn't quite decipher, but that made the hairs on my neck stand up. I was getting seriously freaked out. I backed up my essential work onto an external drive, disconnected the workstation from the network, and decided to take the rest of the day off. I needed fresh air, perspective. I went for a walk, aimlessly wandering the city streets for a couple of hours, trying to shake off the paranoia. When I returned, the workstation was off, which was odd since I just put it to sleep. I powered it back on. The usual boot sequence began, but then it stalled. A single image filled the screen. It was my front door, taken from the hallway outside. The angle was slightly low, as if held by someone crouching. The lighting matched the dim, flickering bulb in my apartment building's corridor. And embedded in the image, watermarked faintly in the corner, was a timestamp. It was from 10 minutes ago. While I was out, my blood ran cold. I wasn't imagining things. Someone had been outside my door. Someone who somehow had access to my disconnected workstation. How? Then, the image on the screen changed. It was the view from my workstation window, overlooking the courtyard. But it wasn't the current view. It was nighttime in the picture, and down in the courtyard, partially obscured by shadow, stood a figure. tall, indistinct, perfectly still, looking up towards my window. A new sound file automatically played through the speakers, overriding the system mute. It was the faint, staticky whisper from before, but clearer this time. Just one word, repeated softly, chillingly. Found. I ripped the power cord from the wall. The screen went black. Silence flooded the room, thick and suffocating. I stood there, shaking, heart pounding against my ribs. Disconnected, powered off. It didn't matter. It wasn't just in the cache anymore. It knew where I was. I backed away from the desk, eyes darting towards my apartment door, towards the window overlooking the courtyard. How long had it been watching? How long until it decided to do more than just leave digital artifacts? I'm still trying to figure out where to go, but every time I close my eyes, all I see are those grainy, unsettling images, and I hear that whisper. Taking the late bus home was always a bit depressing. After finishing my closing shift at the diner, usually around 1 a.m., the number 14 was my only option besides a pricey cab ride. It ran a long, meandering route through deserted industrial parks and quiet residential streets before finally dropping me a few blocks from my apartment. Most nights, it was just me, the weary driver, and maybe one or two other souls too tired to acknowledge each other. It was on one of these rides, maybe the third week of November, that I first noticed him. The bus had pulled up to a stop near the old textile mill, a place long since abandoned, surrounded by crumbling chain-link fences. Under the flickering orange glow of the single working street lamp nearby, I saw a man standing just beyond the pool of light. He was mostly in shadow, wearing dark clothing and standing unnaturally still. What struck me was his posture, rigid, facing the bus, though I couldn't make out his features. When the bus pulled away, I glanced back, and he was gone, or maybe just swallowed by the darkness again. Weird, but easily dismissed. A few nights later, same stop, same time. There he was again. Same spot, same stillness, same dark clothing. This time, I felt a prickle of unease. It wasn't illegal to stand on a street corner, but it was odd. So late in such a deserted area twice in 1 week. I kept watching as the bus drove off. He didn't move until the bus rounded the corner. The following week, it happened again. Textile mill stop, the figure in the dark. Now, I was actively looking for him. My stomach tightened. This wasn't a coincidence. Was he waiting for someone? Or waiting for this specific bus? Was he watching me? I started paying more attention to the other stops. And that's when the real dread set in. He wasn't just at the textile mill stop anymore. 2 nights later, I saw him at the next stop along the route, the one by the defunct auto body shop. Again, just outside the main light, standing perfectly still, facing the bus. My heart hammered. How did he get there? The bus was the only thing moving on these streets. It became a horrifying pattern. Every couple of nights, he'd be there, but at a stop progressively closer to my own. Textile mill, auto body shop, the corner by the boarded-up laundromat, the entrance to the overgrown city park. Always the same shadowy figure, always motionless, always seeming to watch the bus pass. I started to feel hunted. I tried switching seats, sitting further back, hoping maybe he wouldn't see me. It made no difference. There he'd be, a silent sentinel marking stages of my journey home. I considered telling the driver, but what could I say? There's a guy standing on the street corner, looking creepy. He'd think I was nuts. I thought about taking a cab, but I honestly couldn't afford it every night. One night, after seeing him at the park entrance stop, just 3 away from mine, I was almost paralyzed with fear. My stop was next. The bus hissed to a halt at my corner. The doors opened onto the familiar, dimly lit street. I scanned the area frantically. Nothing, just empty sidewalks and dark houses. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. I practically ran the few blocks home, fumbling with my keys, heart pounding. I slammed the door shut, locked it, bolted it, leaned against it, gasping for breath. Safe. I was safe. I went into the kitchen to get some water, my hands still shaking. My kitchen window looks out onto the small alleyway that runs behind my building. As I stood at the sink, a flicker of movement outside caught my eye. I froze. Under the weak glow of the security light attached to the neighboring building, standing at the mouth of the alleyway, was the figure. Unmoving, cloaked in shadow, but unmistakably him. He wasn't on the bus route anymore. He was here. He knew where I lived. I stumbled back from the window, out of sight, crouching down behind the counter. How long had he been there? Had he followed me from the bus stop? Or had he somehow gotten here before me? The silence in my apartment was terrifying. Was he coming to the door? The window? I stayed there, huddled on the kitchen floor, for what felt like hours. Eventually, the first hints of dawn started to filter through the blinds. Mustering every ounce of courage, I crept back to the window and peeked out. The alleyway was empty. I haven't taken the late bus since. I walk the extra mile to the 24-hour train station now, even though it costs more and takes longer. I need the lights, the people, the noise. But sometimes, when I'm walking home from the station, down familiar streets, I see a shadow in a doorway or a figure standing just beyond a streetlight's reach. And I can't help but wonder, was it just one man? Or are there more of them, waiting in the quiet places, watching the lonely routes home? Moving into the top-floor apartment of the old converted Victorian house seemed like a steal. Rent was cheap for the area, it had decent character, and the landlord, Mr. Henderson, lived off-site and seemed pretty hands-off. The only drawback was the layout. My apartment shared a long, thin wall with the only other unit on the floor, apartment 3B. Mr. Henderson had mumbled something about the tenant there being reclusive and keeping odd hours, but assured me they were quiet. For the first week, it was true. Blissful silence. Then the noises started. Not loud, initially, just odd. Late at night, usually between 2 and 4 a.m., I'd hear faint scraping sounds coming through the shared wall, like furniture being dragged slowly across a wooden floor, but softer, more hesitant. Sometimes there'd be a series of soft thuds, rhythmic and dull. I tried to ignore it. Old houses make noises. Maybe my neighbor was a night owl, an artist, a hobbyist. But the sounds had a weird quality, muffled and indistinct, yet somehow unsettling. They never sounded like normal activity. One night, I heard what sounded distinctly like soft, irregular tapping, almost like Morse code, coming from a spot on the wall near my bedroom. I pressed my ear against the cool plaster, listening intently. The tapping stopped abruptly, as if whoever was making it knew I was listening. A chill went down my spine. I never saw the occupant of 3B. Packages addressed to A. Marlowe would sometimes appear outside their door, simple brown boxes with no return addresses, and they'd be gone by the next morning. Occasionally, usually late at night, I'd hear their door creak open and shut, followed by slow, shuffling footsteps in the hallway, but I never managed to catch a glimpse of them if I looked through my peephole. The hallway always seemed empty seconds later. The sounds escalated gradually. The scraping became more frantic sometimes. I started hearing what might have been muffled vocalizations, not words, more like low groans or drawn-out sighs, barely audible through the plaster and lath. And then there was the smell. A faint, intermittent odor started seeping into my apartment, usually noticeable near the shared wall. It was vaguely metallic, like old pennies, mixed with something else, something cloyingly sweet and musty, like decaying flowers. My curiosity warred with my fear. Mr. Henderson didn't answer his phone when I tried calling to ask about the neighbor. I started losing sleep, lying awake, listening to the unsettling symphony from next door. Was Marlowe sick? In trouble? Or was it something else? The sounds didn't feel like someone suffering. They felt purposeful, secretive. One Saturday afternoon, driven by a mixture of concern and morbid curiosity, I decided to knock. I stood outside 3B, the strange metallic sweet smell stronger here. I knocked firmly. Silence. I knocked again, louder. Hello? Is everything all right in there? From inside, very close to the door, I heard a sudden, sharp intake of breath. It was so close, so clear, it sounded like someone had been standing right behind the door the whole time, listening. Then absolute silence again. No footsteps, no shuffling, nothing. Just the unnerving feeling of being observed from the other side of the wood. I backed away slowly and retreated into my apartment, my heart pounding. That night was the worst. Around 3 a.m., I was jolted awake by a loud bang against the shared wall, right behind my headboard. It sounded like someone had slammed their fist, hard, against the plaster. I sat bolt upright in bed, frozen. Then came the scraping, loud, frantic, desperate, moving rapidly along the base of the wall. It was followed by a series of heavy, wet thuds, and then silence, a deeper, more absolute silence than ever before. The silence continued for days. No scraping, no thuds, no shuffling in the hall. The packages stopped appearing outside 3B. The strange smell faded. It was as if the apartment next door had simply ceased to exist. It should have been a relief, but it wasn't. The absence of the familiar, unsettling noises was somehow more disturbing than their presence. I couldn't take it anymore. I called Mr. Henderson again, and this time he picked up. I told him about the noises, the smell, the bang against the wall, and the sudden silence. He was quiet for a long moment, then sighed heavily. Alistair Marlowe, yes, reclusive. He paused. Look, I haven't received rent from 3B in 2 months. The check I got last month bounced. I was going to give him another week before starting eviction proceedings. Another pause. You haven't seen him at all? For days? No, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Not seen, not heard. Nothing. All right, Mr. Henderson said, his voice suddenly tight. Don't go near the apartment. I'll come by with the master key this evening. Around 7. He arrived looking pale and nervous. We stood outside 3B. He knocked, called out Marlowe's name. No response. He slid the key into the lock, turned it, and pushed the door open slowly. The smell hit us first, overpowering now, the metallic tang mixed with rot. The apartment was dim, curtains drawn. What little light came from the hallway revealed chaos. Furniture overturned. Dark stains splattered on the floor and walls. And the shared wall sections of the plaster had been crudely torn away, exposing the lath underneath. Scratch marks, deep and frantic, covered the remaining plaster and the exposed wood. It looked like someone or something had been desperately trying to claw through the wall. There was no sign of Alistair Marlowe, just the wreckage, the smell, and the terrifying gouges in the wall that separated his world from mine. Mr. Henderson called the police. I moved out a week later, breaking my lease. I never found out what happened to Marlowe, or what exactly was making those noises between our walls. But sometimes, late at night in my new place, I think I hear faint scraping sounds, and I pray it's just the old pipes. Living alone has its perks, but the silence can sometimes feel heavy, especially working late from my small apartment. My desk faces a large window that looks out onto the city skyline, mostly anonymous office buildings and the occasional flashing neon sign. During the day, it's fine. At night, the window becomes a giant black mirror, reflecting my tired face and the cluttered room behind me. I first noticed something wrong in that reflection. I've been coding for hours, debugging a particularly nasty piece of back-end logic. I leaned back, rubbing my eyes, and glanced at my reflection in the dark window pane. Everything looked normal to me, the glow of the monitor, the bookshelf behind me, the closed door to the hallway. But as I stared, Something felt off about my reflected self, seemed delayed. When I blinked, the reflection blinked a fraction of a second later. When I shifted slightly in my chair, the movement in the glass lagged just behind. I told myself it was fatigue, a trick of the light, maybe the slight distortion from the double-pane glass. I stood up, walked around, deliberately made sharp movements, watching the window intently. The lag persisted, subtle but undeniable. It was like watching a poorly synced video feed of myself. Unnerving, but I forced myself to brush it off and get back to work, turning up the music to fill the silence. A few nights later, it happened again. This time, I was just sitting back, thinking, staring blankly at the dark monitor screen. Monitors, when off, are even better mirrors than windows. I saw my reflection, bathed in the ambient light from my desk lamp, and behind my reflected head, in the reflection of the room, the closed door seemed to bulge slightly inward for a split second, as if something had pressed against it from the hallway side. I whipped my head around. The actual door was perfectly flat, still and definitely closed. I checked the hallway, empty, silent. My heart started thudding. Was I hallucinating? The anomalies became more frequent, more specific. I'd catch glimpses in the window reflection of objects on my bookshelf being slightly out of place compared to reality. Or the reflection of my desk lamp would flicker when the real lamp was steady. It was always minor, always explainable as tiredness or paranoia if I tried hard enough. But the feeling of being watched, not from outside, but from within the reflections themselves, began to grow. The worst incident happened with the bathroom mirror. I'd gotten up in the middle of the night, stumbled into the bathroom, and flicked on the light. As I looked into the mirror over the sink, my reflection looked back, but its eyes were wrong. They were wide, wider than humanly possible, filled with a frantic terror that wasn't my own, and its mouth was stretched into a silent scream. It lasted only a second. I gasped, recoiled, and when I looked again, my reflection was normal, just my own tired, scared face staring back. But I had seen it. It wasn't just lag or misplaced objects anymore. The reflection was capable of showing something else, something monstrous inhabiting my own image. I started avoiding reflective surfaces after dark. I kept the lights on even when sleeping. I covered the window with heavy blackout curtains. I stopped turning off my monitor, instead just letting a screensaver run constantly. I avoided the bathroom mirror as much as possible. It helped for a while. The apartment felt less heavy, but the paranoia lingered. Was covering the surfaces enough? Or was the thing I saw simply waiting? One evening, I was heating up leftovers in the microwave. The front panel of this particular microwave is a dark, reflective plastic when it's not lit up. I was standing there, waiting for the timer, staring absently at my distorted reflection in the dark panel. And I saw it again. My reflection stood there, but its head was tilted at an impossible angle, listening intently to something I couldn't hear. And its hand, the reflected hand, slowly lifted and pressed its fingers against the inside of the microwave panel, as if trying to push through the glass from the other side. I yelled and jumped back. The microwave timer dinged. The interior light came on. The panel lit up with the time, and the reflection vanished, replaced by the sight of my spinning plate of food. It wasn't just mirrors or windows or monitors. It was any sufficiently reflective surface. How could that be possible? Was it coming from inside these objects? Or was it a distortion of reality itself? I haven't figured it out. I'm typing this on my laptop, screen brightness turned way up, back to the wall. I've covered every mirror, every window. I avoid polished surfaces, but the city is full of reflections. Car windows, puddles on the street, the glass doors of buildings, even the screen of the phone in my pocket. Sometimes, when I catch an unexpected glimpse of myself, I see it, that flicker of wrongness. The eyes too wide, the movement out of sync, the silent scream lurking just behind my own features. It feels like it's getting closer, like the barrier between my reality and its reflected imitation is getting thinner. Surface tension holding reality together. But what happens when it finally breaks? My life runs on routine. Maybe it's the programmer in me, maybe it's just comfort, but I thrive on predictability. Same coffee shop, same route to the office, same podcast during the commute, same lunch spot. It's a small, controlled loop in a chaotic world. Or it was until the loop started glitching. It began with the coffee shop, the daily grind. One Tuesday morning, I walked up, and the familiar forest green awning was bright, almost garish orange. Not just faded, a completely different, vibrant color. I stopped dead on the sidewalk. Had they renovated overnight? But inside, everything looked identical. Same barista, same pastries, same worn wooden counter. I hesitated, then went in. The barista, Chloe, greeted me with her usual smile. "Morning. The usual?" she asked. I nodded numbly. "Is the awning new?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She gave me a puzzled look. "Awning? It's always been green. Are you feeling okay?" I mumbled something about the light, paid for my coffee, and left, glancing back. The awning was green again. Deep, familiar forest green. I shook my head, blaming lack of sleep. But the next day, walking down Elm Street on my usual route, the old bookstore on the corner, Pages Past, had a different name painted above the door, Crimson Reeds. The font was the same, the placement identical, but the name was wrong. I stared, heart starting to pound. I pulled out my phone, searched for Crimson Reeds on that street. No results. Searched for Pages Past. There it was, listed at this exact address. I looked up again. The sign read Pages Past. These weren't just momentary hallucinations. Were they? They felt too solid, too real in the moment. It was like reality flickered, showing me an alternate version for a second before snapping back. The glitches became more frequent, more personal. On the subway, the digital display showing the next station momentarily flashed Cyrillic script instead of English. The usual homeless man I passed near the office, the one with the gray beard and the tartan blanket, one afternoon had piercing blue eyes instead of his usual brown. Just for the instant our gazes met. My office keycard, which usually beeped once, started emitting 2 quick beeps some days, but not others. Each incident was small, deniable in isolation. But the pattern was undeniable. Something was wrong with my routine or my perception of it. I started documenting everything in a small notebook, noting the time, place, and the specific deviation. The list grew disturbingly quickly. One evening, leaving the office, I got into the elevator. Usually, it's just me heading down from the 14th floor at that hour. The doors slid shut, the familiar chime sounded, and we started descending. Then, the elevator stopped abruptly at the 10th floor. The doors opened. Nobody was there. Just the empty, dimly lit corridor of the 10th floor, identical to every other floor. But pinned to the bulletin board directly opposite the elevator was a single sheet of paper that wasn't usually there. It looked like a child's drawing, crayon on construction paper. It depicted a stick figure with wide, panicked eyes, standing inside a box, with jagged lines pressing in from all sides. Underneath, in messy block letters, it read, "Let me out." The elevator doors slid shut before I could react further. It continued its descent as if nothing had happened. When I got to the lobby, I asked the security guard, Mike, if anyone from the 10th floor had been working late or if he'd seen anything unusual. He frowned. 10th floor? That floor's been vacant for renovations for the past month. Mate, completely stripped out. Nobody's been up there. My blood turned to ice. Vacant? Then who, what put that drawing there? Was it meant for me? The glitches intensified after that. My reflection lagging in shop windows. Streetlights flickering off just as I passed underneath them. The podcast I listened to suddenly inserting a single word of static or a nonsensical phrase that didn't belong. It felt like the world was trying to communicate, sending corrupted data packets into my reality stream. The breaking point came last Friday. I was walking home, notebook clutched in my hand, obsessively scanning for deviations. I turned onto my street and stopped. It wasn't my street. The houses were similar Victorian style, but the colors were wrong, the gardens different, the numbers on the doors didn't match. Even the trees lining the pavement seemed subtly altered. It was like a badly rendered copy of my neighborhood. I spun around, looking back the way I came. That street looked wrong too. Panic seized me. I was lost, adrift in this slightly off reality. I pulled out my phone to check the map. No signal. Searching. The screen flickered. For a horrifying second, the background image wasn't my usual photo, but that child's drawing from the elevator. Let me out. Then the screen went black. I looked up, heart pounding. The street was shifting, houses flickering between the familiar and the alien. The sky seemed too dark. A figure emerged from the distorted porch of a house that should have been mine. It looked vaguely human, but its proportions were wrong, elongated, its movements jerky like a broken animation. It turned its head towards me, and even from a distance, I could see its face was a blur, a smudge where features should be. It started moving towards me, not walking, but drifting, across the flickering pavement. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, blindly, away from the street that wasn't mine, away from the figure that wasn't human. I ran until my lungs burned, until the familiar world seemed to solidify around me again. The right street names, the right house colors. I made it back to my apartment, locked myself in. I haven't left since. I keep the curtains drawn. I don't trust the routine anymore. I don't trust the world outside. The glitches might have stopped for now, but I know that other version, the wrong version, is still out there, bleeding through at the edges. And I saw its inhabitant. What happens if the pattern deviates so much that I can't find my way back? What if I'm already trapped in the wrong loop? The ad called it a caretaker's opportunity for a historic property in a secluded, tranquil setting. Translation: house sitting a huge, slightly crumbling mansion miles from anywhere, owned by some wealthy eccentric who spent winters abroad. The pay was decent, and as a freelance writer needing peace and quiet, it seemed perfect. The owner, Mr. Blackwood, gave me a quick tour, pointed out the temperamental boiler, handed over a hefty ring of keys, and wished me a productive winter. Then he was gone, leaving me in echoing silence. The house was quiet, almost unnervingly so. Thick stone walls, heavy carpets, and acres of surrounding woodland muffled everything. For the first few days, the loudest sounds were my own typing and the groaning protest of the ancient boiler kicking in. It was exactly the peace I'd wanted, until the silence started to curdle. It began with faint sounds at the edge of hearing. Was that whispering just outside the drafty library window, or just the wind sighing through the pines? Did I hear footsteps on the floor above me, the master suite I was explicitly told not to enter? Or was it just the house settling, timbers contracting in the cold? I'd pause, listen intently, heart beating a little faster. Nothing, just the oppressive stillness rushing back in. I told myself it was my imagination, amplified by the isolation and the sheer size of the old house. Then came the music. One evening, reading by the fireplace, I heard it, the tinny, distant strains of what sounded like an old waltz, played on a music box. It seemed to be coming from upstairs, maybe the forbidden master suite. It was faint, melancholic, and deeply out of place. I muted the TV, held my breath. The music continued for maybe 30 seconds, then abruptly stopped. I grabbed the heaviest flashlight I could find and crept upstairs. The hallway was dark and cold. I checked the doors, all locked, as they should be. I pressed my ear against the thick oak door of the master suite. Silence. Not a peep. Had I imagined it? The melody lingered in my head, unsettlingly familiar yet unplaceable. The sounds became more frequent, more varied. A soft weeping sound, seemingly from an empty guest room. The scrape of a chair leg on a wooden floor downstairs when I was upstairs. A door creaking open and shut somewhere deep within the house's labyrinthine layout. Each time I investigated, I found nothing. No open doors, no shifted furniture, no source for the sound. I started feeling jumpy, paranoid. The silence was no longer peaceful. It felt charged, like the air before a storm, pregnant with sounds that shouldn't exist. I tried playing music constantly, keeping the TV on for background noise, but it didn't help. The phantom sounds seemed to weave themselves between the notes, hiding in the quiet moments. Frustrated and needing proof I wasn't going crazy, I set up my phone to record audio overnight, placing it on the bedside table. In the morning, I eagerly played back the recording. Hours of silence, my own breathing, the distant hoot of an owl, but none of the sounds I thought I'd heard during the night. No footsteps, no whispers, just normal, empty house silence. I tried again the next night, moving the phone to the hallway outside my door. Same result. It was as if the sounds only existed for my ears, refusing to be captured. Or worse, as if whatever was making them knew I was trying to record them. One afternoon, I was in the kitchen making coffee. Through the window over the sink, I saw the sprawling, snow-dusted lawn leading towards the woods. Suddenly, I heard it clearly. A child's laughter, bright and clear, coming from the edge of the tree-line. I froze, coffee mug halfway to my lips. There were no other houses for miles. No children lived here. I stared out the window, scanning the woods. Nothing moved. The laughter faded, leaving only the wind. That night, I decided to explore the master suite. Blackwood had forbidden it, but the music, the feeling that something centered around that room, gnawed at me. The key ring had dozens of keys. After 15 minutes of tense fumbling, one finally turned the lock. The room was opulent, frozen in time. A four-poster bed draped in velvet, antique furniture draped in white sheets, portraits on the wall with watching eyes, and on a dusty dressing table, an old, ornate music box. Heart-pounding, I lifted the lid. It was silent. I gently prodded the mechanism. Nothing. It was broken or fully wound down. Couldn't have been the source of the waltz. As I stood there, scanning the room, a floorboard creaked directly behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. The room was empty, but the air felt thick, charged, and colder than the hallway. And then I heard it, not through the walls or from a distance, but right there, next to my ear. A faint, sibilant whisper that sounded like dry leaves skittering across stone. Listening, I didn't wait to hear more. I fled the room, slamming the door, fumbling to lock it again. I ran downstairs, not stopping until I was back in the relative safety of the kitchen, bathed in electric light. The sounds didn't stop, but they changed. They felt closer now, more personal. Sometimes, I'd hear my own name whispered, just as I was drifting off to sleep. Other times, the footsteps outside my door sounded heavier, more deliberate. The house no longer felt empty. It felt occupied by something unseen, something that listened, that watched, that waited in the stillness. My writing contract here ends in 3 weeks. I spend my days counting the hours, jumping at every creak and groan of the old house. I keep the recordings running, hoping to catch something, anything, but they remain silent. It knows I'm listening, and I think somehow it enjoys the performance. Thrift stores are my weakness, not for clothes or furniture, but for the forgotten detritus, old photos, weird knickknacks, things that whisper of past lives. It was in a dusty corner of a Salvation Army, buried in a box of tangled costume jewelry, that I found the locket. It was heart-shaped, tarnished silver, surprisingly heavy. No chain. The clasp was stiff, but I managed to pry it open. Inside weren't the expected portraits of smiling ancestors. On one side was a miniature, sepia-toned photograph of a single, unblinking eye staring directly out. It was startlingly detailed, unnervingly realistic. The other side held a tiny, dried, pressed flower, dark and brittle, unrecognizable. There was something compellingly morbid about it. For $2, I couldn't resist. I took it home, cleaned the tarnish off with some polish. The silver gleamed, but the eye inside seemed darker, more intense now. I put the locket on my bedside table, intending to find a chain for it later. That night, I had the first nightmare. I dreamt I was in a vast, dark room, and countless eyes were watching me from the shadows, all identical to the one in the locket. I woke up sweating, heart racing. Coincidence, I told myself. But the nightmares persisted, variations on the theme of being watched by that single, intense eye. During the day, I started feeling uneasy in my own apartment. I'd catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, turn, and find nothing. Objects seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking, a book tilted on the shelf, a mug closer to the edge of the counter than I remembered leaving it. And I kept noticing the locket. It seemed prominent. No matter where I put it on the cluttered bedside table, my gaze seemed drawn to it. Sometimes, I'd swear the tiny pressed flower inside looked different, less brittle, almost fresh. Other times, the eye seemed to follow me as I moved around the room. Impossible, of course. A trick of light on the curved photo surface. Then small things started going wrong. My computer crashed, losing an important file. A package I was expecting got lost in the mail. I tripped on a perfectly flat pavement, badly twisting my ankle. Minor annoyances, but they piled up, starting the day after I brought the locket home. A cloud of low-grade misfortune seemed to hang over me. One evening, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling, I was watching TV. The locket sat on the coffee table. Suddenly, the TV fizzled, the image dissolving into static. And from the static, clear as day, came a single soft whisper that sounded like it was right beside me. Mine. The TV screen went black. The power hadn't gone out. Just the TV had died. That was it. This locket, it wasn't just creepy. It felt malevolent. I decided I had to get rid of it. I snatched it up, the metal felt unnaturally cold, and marched outside to the dumpster behind my building. I threw it in, hearing it clink against other trash. I felt an immediate sense of relief, like a weight lifting. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in days. No nightmares. In the morning, feeling lighter, I went to make coffee. As I reached for my usual mug, my hand froze. Sitting on the kitchen counter right next to the coffee maker was the locket. Gleaming silver, closed. My blood ran cold. How? I lived alone. The doors were locked. Had I imagined throwing it away? No, I distinctly remembered the cold metal, the clink in the dumpster. Had someone retrieved it and put it here? Why? I grabbed the locket again, a wave of nausea washing over me. This time, I wouldn't just throw it away. I took it out to the nearby park, found a secluded spot near the river, and threw it as hard as I could into the water. It vanished with a small splash. Gone for good this time, but the feeling of being watched didn't leave. If anything, it intensified. The glitches in my apartment continued, and the nightmares returned worse than before. Now, in the dreams, the eyes weren't just watching. They were weeping dark, viscous tears, and the whispering sound filled the air, incomprehensible but full of menace. 2 days after throwing the locket in the river, I woke up to a tapping sound. Not at the window, not at the door. It was coming from inside my bedroom closet. Slow, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. I lay frozen, listening. It stopped. Silence. Then, tap, tap, tap. Closer now, as if whatever was inside was moving towards the door. I didn't own anything that could make that noise. With trembling hands, I reached for the lamp, flicked it on. The tapping stopped instantly. I stared at the closet door, heart hammering. Should I open it, or should I run? As I debated, something slid under the closet door from the inside. Slowly, deliberately, it came to rest on the carpet in the thin strip of light from the hallway. It was the locket, tarnished again with bits of river mud clinging to it. And it was open. The single I stared up at me, and the pressed flower was gone. In its place, nestled against the tarnished silver, was a small, freshly snipped lock of my own hair. I screamed. I scrambled out of bed, grabbed my keys and phone, and ran out of the apartment, out of the building, into the pre-dawn chill. I haven't been back. I don't know what was in the closet, or how the locket returned, or how it got my hair. All I know is that it's not just a keepsake anymore. It's a claim, and it doesn't like to be abandoned.